There are multiple ways of accessing resources in the cloud. Azure Portal is just one of the methods. Azure Portal will let you build, manage, and monitor everything using a simple web interface. You can access and manage complex applications with a single unified console. With Azure Portal, you can also search for resources, services, and documents, manage all the resources in your Azure Portal, create customized dashboards so that you can access your frequently accessed resources quickly. You can put them in your favorites. You can also access Cloud Shell and then manage, maintain your resources quickly using Cloud Shell commands. You can receive notifications when resources are published or modified. You have direct access to the documentation right from the Azure portal. So your Azure portal is a one-stop shop for you to manage your resources, services, documents, and look around the monitoring aspect of your resources.
We just learned how you can manage the Azure resources using portal.azure.com. But that's not the only method. There are several methods you can use to connect to the portal. Using mobile applications is one of the preferred methods because you can manage the resources on the go. So I have the application installed on my phone, but regardless of whether you are an Android user or iOS, you got the application for both kind of users. Now, what can you do with the mobile applications? Let's see what we can do here. So if I click on subscriptions right there, so you can manage all your subscriptions. So regardless of how many subscriptions you have in your enterprise, you will see all of them right here upon your authentication. So I can manage the permissions for my users in the resource group, go back and then click on the resources to identify the resources I have in my resource group. Click on individual resource group to identify how many resources I have there. And of course, you can manage them, restart virtual machines, adding a new hard disk, extending the memory of the disk is just one of the features. You can click on notifications and then identify how many alerts you have in the last 24 hours. How about managing your interface using Cloud Shell? Now, this is an intuitive way of managing resources using a script. So regardless you are a PowerShell user or a Bash or maybe Windows or Linux, you can manage both kind of scripts right from a single interface. That's the best part. You can toggle between PowerShell and Bash with a single click right there, but you may have to just restart the Cloud Shell. It takes about 6 or 7 seconds to come up, so it's pretty quick. So all you need to do is store all your scripts right here in the Cloud Shell and manage from there. So if you think you got to restart a whole set of virtual machines from the interface, this is the way to go. Now, that means that you can now manage the resources from your mobile phone. All you need to do is have the application installed, and for security purposes, have the multi-factor authentication set up on the phone as well.
You will find yourself connecting to Azure portal several times a day and manage the resources here. Now I have connected to portal.azure.com and I can then manage all of these resources that you see on the left hand side. So you can create virtual networks, load balancers, virtual machines, and this list is endless. There are just too many resources that Azure has as of today. You can find out all the resources that Azure has by clicking on All Services. Once you click on it, you will see the world of Azure and you can actually create everything from the top to the bottom. There are hundreds and thousands of resources provided by Microsoft and their partners in the Azure portal. In this video, let's understand what options are available inside the Azure portal. Services is just one of them. You also have this dashboard option. You can create your custom dashboard. So as soon as you log into the Azure portal, what do you want to see? Do you want to see the monitoring status of the virtual machines that were created this week? Do you want to see the billing report per time zone? So administrators usually create a new dashboard by clicking on the dashboard button and then adding these resources to the grid on the right hand side. So I can just click on this add button and then it adds the element on the grid. You can change the time zone from what exists on this block, from this is European standard, and you can change it to whatever you want in this list. Do you want it 24-hour format or 12-hour format? Well, let's add some more resources from the left hand side to the grid. Well, you can say I want to add availability and users and groups in Active Directory, user activity summary, and I also want to know how many resource groups I have. You can drag and drop these elements in the grid to give it a better look and feel, and then just click on Done Customizing. You have your new dashboard created. So as soon as you log in, you can toggle between your custom dashboards. Usually we rename these dashboards to refer it to a particular department or a business unit. Now these elements on the dashboard act as a quick reference point to your resource in Azure. So let's say you want to find out how many users and groups you have in Active Directory. I can just click on it and it takes me right there into the interface. So I do not have to drill down to this particular resource and then identify my resources there, right? So dashboard is a quick reference point to all my resources. On the top right hand side, you can see your user ID that you're logged in with. This one is a feedback button. So anytime you want to give feedback to Microsoft, you can just do that by clicking on this smiley button, write your feedback here and click on submit feedback. There's a help option. So at any point in time you want to know more about Microsoft services, the roadmap as to where Microsoft is going and taking the Azure services. Are there any new public and private preview features being released? Well, these are the hyperlinks that will help us identify that. Settings will help us modify the look and feel of the interface, changing the color, notifications, and how the interface acts and gives you a user experience is all controlled in this settings button, which looks like a gear. The notification will tell us any actions or activities happening in your Azure portal. For instance, if you are creating a virtual machine or a web application or a storage account or restarting a virtual machine, the status of such actions are shown up in the notifications. Then you have this filter option. Organizations usually have multiple directories, and that will happen if the organization has acquired and has more than one organization within them. They will merge those directories into one and keep it in a single unified console. So you can then see those subscriptions right here. You can filter those subscriptions here and manage them from a single unified console. If you would like to manage your resources using Azure PowerShell or with Azure Shell, then you can just click on the Cloud Shell option. Moving forward, in the next video, we will use this Azure Shell and PowerShell to create resources in the cloud. It's just not about creating, but also managing the resources, like let's say restarting a virtual machine, adding a new hard disk, or adding additional memory to the virtual machine. Well, these are just few things that I said, but everything can be controlled using Azure Shell as well as the PowerShell. Well, this is just a snapshot of Azure interface, which is portal.azure.com. But as and when we start using this interface, there will be new things that will surface and we will discuss about them. Azure Cloud Shell is an interactive shell and that can be accessed to the web browser for managing Azure resources. It provides the flexibility for choosing a shell-based experience and portal as well at the same time. Linux users can opt for a bash experience, while Windows users can opt for a PowerShell experience. Cloud Shell enables access to browser-based command line experience built into the Azure Management Portal. You can leverage Cloud Shell to work undisturbed from a local machine in a way only the cloud can provide. There are several advantages and features that Cloud Shell has. The Cloud Shell is temporary and requires a new or existing Azure file share to be mounted. It offers an integrated graphical text editor based on the open source Monaco editor. You do not have to authenticate yourselves again and again every time you launch Cloud Shell because it authenticates automatically for instant access to your resources. Cloud Shell is a temporary host provided on a per session, per user basis. For security purposes, Cloud Shell will time out after 20 minutes without any interactive activity. Cloud Shell requires its own resource group. It has its own storage account and an Azure file share. Cloud Shell will use the same Azure file share for both Bash and PowerShell. It is assigned one machine per user account. The permissions for Cloud Shell are set as a regular Linux user in Bash. In the next video, let's look at the demonstration for Cloud Shell and understand how it works practically. Okay, so that's my Azure portal and I'm logged in with my account. So let's go ahead and learn how you can connect to the Cloud Shell. To connect to the Cloud Shell, just click on this little icon which looks like a command prompt and it will pop up that little box. Now keep in mind that this little box itself is a virtual machine and it needs to have some kind of a storage in the backend so it can store all your scripts and files. And for that purpose, it needs a storage account. You have to click on create storage and it will take about a minute to create the storage account. All right, looks like that is ready. Let's go for a full screen mode. Now, there are quite a lot of options on the top. If you would like to toggle between Bash and PowerShell, that's the way to go. Just click on PowerShell and it will restart the instance and connect to the PowerShell mode. You can restart the whole instance by clicking on this. So just in case if your server is stuck or your commands that you're getting executed are not getting executed as per the documentation, then you might want to restart the machine. There is a help option, the settings. Inside the settings you can change the text and the font. And if you would like to download and upload files into this machine, then that's the way to go. You can just click on this and click on upload or download. Then you can change to a new session which will open up totally different session on a different browser. Then you can connect to a script method, so this will open a new editor on the right hand side. You will get a new text editor where you can write your own script, a bash script probably. Then if you would like to search something or configure in a particular way, open the ports. You just need to enter the port number here and it will open the port on that security group on the firewall. So these are certain options we have. We do not have to memorize these options because these keep on changing. Microsoft keeps adding new buttons and features to provide more value to the Cloud Shell. At this point, we can close it and run certain commands on the Cloud Shell. One such command is AZ account list. That will tell me the details about my subscription. So this tells me that yes, this is an Azure Cloud account. It's a pay-as-you-go account and it is not disabled. It is enabled account, so it's operational. There are several commands that you can run to create virtual machines, restart instances, etc. Let's also do certain commands on PowerShell. Now, as I informed earlier that you have to restart the Cloud Shell. It takes about a minute to get it operational, up and running. Okay, now that the Azure PowerShell is ready, we are now ready to execute certain commands. Let's start with this command called get-azure rm subscription. Yeah, so when I hit enter, it should tell me the subscription that I belong to, and we can then run more commandlets. Get-azure rm subscription, and then you can then probably select a particular object if you want, or if you want to identify all of them, just say pipe to gm, and these are the properties that you can pull up. Let's say you want to know the current storage account only or the current storage account name, then you would say get-azure rm subscription, and then you want to select just the current storage account and maybe the current storage account name as well. So it's not case sensitive, it's okay. PowerShell is really forgiving and it's very much grammar friendly. I don't have to be uppercases and doesn't have to be case sensitive. Hit enter. So current storage account and current storage account name is empty. Yeah, there are no typos, but still we did not get any output. So there are no values in there. The point is to show you that you can run all PowerShell commands and CLI based commands in the single console by just toggling between these two. So regardless you're a Linux user or Windows user, you would still like this way of managing resources because you can write shell scripts or PowerShell scripts. Moving forward, when we proceed in the course, we will learn how do you deploy resources with PowerShell, how do you restart instances with shell scripts, etc. So there's a lot coming up, but this video is just an introduction to the shell. In PowerShell, commands are called as commandlets, pronounced as command-let. So if you want to get the information about, let's say, a web server, then the command will be get-web server. This is collectively called as commandlet. A commandlet lets you manipulate the features of an entity, which is web server in this case. Let's take another example. In your computer, there are several processes that are running. If you want to retrieve all the processes, then you just say get-processes. How about services? You got a whole lot of services running on your computer. And if you want to get all those services on the screen, then the way to get that is by typing get-service. Probably you want to start a particular service from the list of services. Then the commandlet used will be start-service, followed by the service name. So if it was an English class, then I would just say that each commandlet name consists of a standard verb hyphenated with a specific noun. Now, get is not the only verb that can be used. There are several actions that can be taken on nouns. For example, get for retrieving information, set for modifications, format for formatting data, out for sending output to the file. This list can really become exhaustive. You may ask me, is there a way I can get the list of verbs that can be used? Well, the answer is right there in the statement. You can use get-verb to get all the verbs that can be used in PowerShell. So let's start with our first baby steps in PowerShell with get-verb. Okay, let's get started from where we left. In the previous video, we learned about the usage of PowerShell, what get is, set is, formatting is, start a service is, etc. That falls under the category of verb-noun. We also learned that there's a command with the name get-verb where you can enumerate the list of verbs that PowerShell would accept. Now I have launched PowerShell on my computer. There are several ways in which you can launch PowerShell. I usually prefer going through this box and typing PowerShell, hit enter, and it launches PowerShell pretty quickly, the fastest way of opening it. There are other administrators who prefer going through the start box and then going through the PowerShell like this. It all depends about your comfort level with the operating system, but I always prefer Windows R and then type PowerShell, hit enter. That's quick for me. Now I'll exit from here and just run this command called get-verb on the PowerShell prompt. Hit enter and it shows me quite a lot of these verbs that PowerShell will accept. This add, clear, close, copy, etc. The ones that we demonstrated in the previous video should also be there, like get or restart. It's right here, restart-computer. So we always know that this verb is followed by a noun. We can give it a shot. If you don't know what it follows with, we can just say restart hyphen and then tab. You will notice that the nouns are automatically populated every time I hit the tab on the keyboard. So it circles around the nouns that are available in the PowerShell library. Depending on the usage, you may pick and choose one of them. But with experience, you will always memorize and remember the verbs and nouns and their combinations. So let's say you want to restart a computer. So just say restart-com and tab. The auto-completion feature is really helpful. So you do not have to type a lot, and that reduces the possibility of typographical errors as well. Now you have a combination of verb and a noun. Now let's say I don't know what to type after that. So Microsoft PowerShell has a wonderful help utility built in it. And if you're looking for examples, you can just type hyphen examples after the commandlet. Hit enter and it will give you the entire documentation about how restart hyphen computer can be used and what is the purpose of it. As you notice, there are also examples inside here. It says example 1 will restart the local computer. So if I run restart of a computer without any syntax, it will just restart my laptop. Whereas if you want to restart the computers in an array, that's what we use with a hyphen computer name syntax followed by the server names in double quotes with a comma separated values. Now this goes in an array. Similarly, there are example 3, example 4, 5, etc. Depending on what you may want to use, you would like to first look at the examples, see how it can be used and different ways in which it can be interpreted. It's always a good idea to look at the help documentation. So if you don't know how to use a particular commandlet, help with the example syntax is what I would recommend. At this time, I would do a Control C, clear the screen, and go back to where we started from. Now, we did get hyphen verb to get the list of verbs. Let's look at another example. Oh, there's a start option. There's a stop option as well. On deny, probably we are looking at permissions there, disabling a particular service, mounting a volume, backing up your disk. So there are numerous options to manage your machines. The list of verbs are available here. The combination of syntaxes needs to be figured out by using a hyphen and then tab completing and circling around the options available. And then you do a hyphen example syntax with the help option to see how it can be used. It's more like a manual file in Linux or a help file in Windows. Remember that these concepts will remain the same regardless of where you're picking up the PowerShell commands from. It could be your local Windows PowerShell commandlets or could be cloud-based PowerShell commandlets. These fundamentals always remain the same, and that's why PowerShell is not a scripting language. PowerShell is a framework that can be modified, manipulated, make your own modules, just customize your own programming platform. In the upcoming videos, we'll learn about modules in PowerShell. Every commandlet that you run on PowerShell sits inside something called as a module. So if you want to run a commandlet on your machine, you need to make sure that the module is available. And if the module is not available, then we may land up in errors like these. In this case, the user is trying to run a command called connect-msol service. And the error shows up because your operating system does not recognize the commandlet. This is happening because the module that has the commandlet is not installed or is not available. You can identify the list of modules on your computer by running get-module with the syntax called -list available. Let's see how the output looks like. On the PowerShell interface, I'll run this command called get-module, use the tab to autocomplete, and use -list available syntax. You can also use tab here for auto-completion. Hit enter, and depending on the number of modules you have installed on your computer, it may take proportionate amount of time. So as you notice, the modules installed on my computer are all displayed. You can pick up just any one at random. In this case, I have the Azure module installed. This is the module name, and these are the commands that are available inside this module called as Azure. So since I have installed the Azure modules, I have the commandlets or all the possible commandlets that I can use with Azure. So let's say I want to play around Azure Active Directory. Then I have the commandlets ready in the module called as Azure AD. Let's look at Windows specific commands by scrolling down a little bit further. The Windows Defender, the BitLocker, bit transfer module is there. DNS client module is there, so I can use resolve-DNS name or clear-DNS client cache commandlet to do certain actions on the DNS. There is a KDS, which is a Kerberos key distribution service key on my machine. Similarly, PKI related modules so that I can create self-signed certificates, manage and export certificates, etc. So commandlets are inside the modules. Modules are installed by default on your computer, or in this case, Azure module has been downloaded from the internet. So if you want to manage virtual machines in VMware infrastructure, or manage your VDI environment in Citrix, or play around the virtual machines or EC2 instance hosted on AWS interface. Well, these are not the default modules that will be available on your computer. You have to go to the vendor specific website called maybe VMware or Citrix or Amazon Web Services and download those specific modules on your computer to manage them. In this case, I've already downloaded the Azure modules on the computer, and that's why I'm able to see all the modules and commandlets available for Azure. Let's learn how you can install the Azure specific modules on your device. This is required so that you can manage different kinds of resources on Azure. Like, let's say if you want to create a virtual machine or restart the virtual machine, probably add an additional disk to the virtual machine, or create a storage account, or create users in bulk in Azure Active Directory. For every little thing, you may need a PowerShell script. And that's one of the reasons you might want to install Azure specific PowerShell modules on your device. Although I have the Azure modules installed on my computer, and we saw that in the previous video that we ran get-module-list available, and Azure modules were there on my device. But you can install it on your computer by just running this command on the PowerShell interface, which is install-module, like get verb. It's just like verb-noun. Install is an activity that you want to do. And what do you want to install? A module. What kind of module? It is AZ, install-module, AZ. And now because this is gonna modify certain things in your system configuration, make sure that you launch it as an administrator. So launch PowerShell, and before you do that, just right click and run as administrator. Let's hit enter and see what happens. Okay, we got a message that you are installing the modules from an untrusted repository. Now this is on a GitHub repository. AZ is on a GitHub, that's why it says untrusted repository, which is okay. I will say yes and hit enter. This will take quite a lot of time because Azure is not the only module. There were specific modules. Like there's an Azure SQL module, Azure Active Directory module, Azure Storage, Azure Backup. So there are a lot of individual modules within Azure. So make sure that you got the right amount of bandwidth and time as well, and leave your computer for some time for it to install Azure module correctly. Although I have Azure modules installed, it is updating them to the latest version. I'll pause the video for now because I'm sure you don't want to see the progress bar here. It will install anyway, so I'll pause it and resume it once it is complete. Okay, I'm resuming this session because I've got an error here which says that the following commands are already available on this. So it detected that my computer has these commandlets, so why do I need it again? And one of the beauty of PowerShell is that these error messages are self-explanatory. It is not giving me complex error codes like 0x00CB something, right? It's simple, easy to understand, and tells me in English that these commands are already available. And look at this, it also tells me how to solve it. Use -allow clobber parameter if you want to install this module. So making my life simple, I do not have to do Google. The answer is right there. So root cause analysis of your problem is done by PowerShell. It gives you the error message and the solution right there. Sometimes you may get generic messages as well. So at times you may have to go and search on the internet what exactly it means. But most of the times I have seen in my experience that it just shows you the error message in easily understandable language, plus sometimes the solution as well. Okay, let's see what will happen now. I'll pause the video again, and if everything is successful, I'll let it go, or if I get an error, I'll pause it so we can solve it together. Okay, looks like the installation is complete. As you notice, the installation of Azure module from the internet is so easy. All we need is a device with internet access, and that's all. Run this command called install-module with AZ and then -allow clobber as a syntax. We can verify this by just typing login-azure the tab account, and you will see that all these syntaxes are available. So login-azure RM account will actually log me in to the Azure subscription. Gives me a pop-up. Make sure that your IE is healthy. Usually it takes Internet Explorer as the default browser. So just type my user ID here and the credentials. Okay, so I have an Azure account already, so it shouldn't be a problem, and there you go. So I'm already logged into my Azure subscription, ready to run all the commands that it can accept. So if I just run get -az subscription, yeah, hit enter, it tells me about my subscriptions. I've got a message here, so it's a good idea to run this command instead of AZ subscription. Just run get-az Azure RM subscription, which will give me right information. So anyways, we got the Azure module installed on our device. In the next video, we'll learn how you can create and manage your resource group in PowerShell. In this video, we'll learn how you can use PowerShell to create a resource group. To start with, we will log into your Azure account and then verify if the authentication is successful or not. Then we'll use the following command to create a resource group. We'll also learn how you can retrieve your resource group details with this get-az resource group commandlet. Then finally, to end with, we'll also delete the resource group with the remove-az resource group command. Let's get started. I've launched PowerShell on my computer, and the first step that we're going to do is log in and authenticate ourselves to Azure subscription. So the command is login-az account. That will give you a pop-up to type your credentials. Okay, so authentication is complete. The next step is to verify if the authentication is done or not. If you notice, I'm logged in as my account and it is a pay-as-you-go subscription. In your account, it may be a free tier or a pay-as-you-go or an enterprise account, depending on what subscription you are using. You can get more details about your subscription by typing get-az subscription. I usually type half of the command and then just to use tab completion to automatically complete, and that makes sure that there are no typographical errors. So you get the same information here. My account is pay as you go, tenant ID is as follows, and then state is enabled. Good. Now let's go ahead and create a resource group in our subscription. The command to create a resource group is new-az resource group, and use tab, and then you can name the resource group as test or dev or production, or let's say prod_IT. So remember that these names are just used for billing purposes, so that you know who owns this particular resource group, so you can charge them back. You can add more tags to it later on as well. Every resource group needs a resource location as well, so make sure that we have the location attribute specified during the resource group creation. Let's use East US. Hit enter. and give it a minute for the resource group account to be created. There you go. So it is successful. You can also get the number of resource groups you have in your subscription by typing get-az resource group and then just hit enter. It tells me that I have two resource groups. One is for my Cloud Shell and the other one is the prod_it that we just created a minute ago. Now if I go to my Azure graphical user interface, I should be able to find the resource group there as well. Let's go ahead and try and see if we can remove the resource group from the console. So I will clear the screen and use remove-az resource group, and then the name of the resource group is prod_it. This time I do not have to specify the location. I say yes for the subsequent prompts, and then it should be deleted quickly because I do not have any resources in it. So in this video, we learned how you can log in and authenticate yourself to Azure subscription, create a resource group, and then also remove the resource group using PowerShell. You might have seen or used Azure PowerShell commands in the format Azure RM and AZ as well. In December 2018, Microsoft released the general availability of Azure RM module with its replacement and replaced it with AZ module. Now, this new module has several features. This is a shortened commandlet noun prefix which replaces Azure RM. The AZ module ships with backward compatibility for Azure RM module. So the -Azure RM commandlet format will work. However, going forward, you should transition to the AZ module and use -az commands instead of Azure RM commands. Just like PowerShell, you can also manage the resources using Azure CLI. You can download the Azure CLI module from the following URL. All you need to do is just go to this URL and download this executable. Once it is downloaded, installed, you're ready to run the Azure CLI commands. I've installed the Azure CLI executable on my computer already, and I should be able to run the AZ commands on my machine. To find the version of Azure CLI, you need to run az-version here. Hit enter. Then it tells me that the version of Azure CLI is 2.0.47. I can also log in to Azure CLI with az space login command. Hit enter. It will then try to log in with your default credentials. I'll just log in quickly, type my password, and it says you have logged into the Azure. You can close this window or you'll be redirected to Azure CLI documents in 10 seconds. Well, you can either click on it directly or wait for this to redirect. Here you will have a reference of CLI educating us about what CLI is and how you can use the CLI to manage the resources in Azure. At this point, I'll close this, go back to the CLI. It says that we have launched a browser for you to log in. For your old experience with device code, use AZ login -- device code. Just like PowerShell, Azure CLI also tells me that my account subscription is pay-as-you-go, is enabled, and the subscription that I'm using is as follows. This is my tenant ID. Now we are ready to use commands in Azure CLI to create resources and manage resource group in Azure. Resource Manager comes with several benefits. If you'd like to manage and monitor all the resources in your infrastructure as a group, then Resource Manager is the way to go. That means that you can now deploy, manage, and monitor all the resources for your solution as a group rather than handling these resources individually. You can repeatedly deploy your solution throughout the development lifecycle and have confidence that your resources are deployed in a consistent state. You can manage your infrastructure through declarative templates rather than using scripts. You can define the dependencies between the resources so they are deployed in the correct order. You can apply access control to all services in your resource group because role-based access control is natively integrated into the management platform. You can apply tags to resources to logically organize all the resources in your subscription. You can clarify your organization's billing by viewing costs for a group of resources sharing the same tag. And that is exactly why tagging is important. So if you have tags with the name, let's say development, you can identify what is the cost for that development business unit and then charge them back. And this is done per resource group. Microsoft Azure has categorized its service offerings into various segments. Examples of such segments are compute, storage, SQL, network, IoT, etc. These segments have various subcomponents to offer. For example, compute has to offer images, snapshots, virtual machines, and storage has to offer storage accounts, blobs, files, tables, etc. Now, remember that the top category in this case is called as resource provider, and its subcategories are called as resource types. Each resource provider offers a set of resources and operations for working with an Azure service. For example, if you want to store keys and secrets, you work with Microsoft.Key Vault, which will then be your resource provider. Now, this resource provider will offer a resource type called as vaults for creating the key vault. Before getting started with deploying your resources, you should gain an understanding of the available resource providers. Knowing the names of the resource providers and resources helps to define the resources you want to deploy to Azure. So the name of resource type is of the format resource-provider, which can be compute, storage, or SQL, and then slash resource type, which will be depending on what the resource provider is. If it is compute, then it will be images, snapshots, or virtual machines. So that will be what type of services your resource provider is providing. I just wanted to take a moment to show you the resource providers we have in Azure. I'm in the Azure console on the dashboard, and if you go to the search box on the top and type resource provider, you will see something called the Resource Explorer here. Just click on it and it will show you all the providers we have in Azure as on today. This is constantly updated. Now the ones that we're talking about like compute, SQL, IoT, network are just 3 or 4 of them that we spoke about in the previous video. But as you scroll down, you will see a whole lot of resource providers and their resource type if you expand them. So Microsoft.compute is a resource provider and the resource type is everything underneath that. Similarly, you can find resource providers and types if you scroll down to the bottom. Now, there's Microsoft.devices as a resource provider and its resource types will be these. So it will be used in the IoT section. You can find more about it by clicking on it, and then on the right hand side you will see a JSON created for you. Now JSON is a JavaScript object notation which ends with a comma, so these are all comma separated, and in the end there will be no comma because the declaration is complete. We'll talk more about JSON as we move forward, but at this time we are just talking about resource providers and their types in JSON format. So Microsoft provides these resource providers and types to let us know what features exist in each provider. For example, in compute section, it will provide availability sets, disk encryption sets, disk galleries, etc. And when Microsoft has to release a new feature under the compute section, it will just release it as a type under this provider. Sometimes you may need to move resources to either a new subscription or a new resource group in the same subscription. When moving resources, both the source group and the target group are logged during the operation. That means write and delete operations are blocked on the resource group until the move completes. Now that lock means you cannot add, update or delete resources in the resource groups. But it does not mean that the resources are frozen. For example, if you move a virtual machine to a new resource group, An application accessing the virtual machine at that point in time experiences no downtime. In this demonstration, we will create a resource group, then lock the resource group so that no one can delete it. We will also try to delete it and see what kind of error message we get. Then we'll remove the lock and then delete the resource group. All of these activities can be done with the UI as well. But we will do all these activities with PowerShell because for the exam purposes, like I said in one of the earlier videos, knowledge of PowerShell is very important. I've logged into the Azure portal now, but as we discussed earlier, we will run all the commands using Azure PowerShell. So here's the PowerShell. The first command that we always run is to log into your Azure subscription. Say login -az account and hit enter. And this should give you a pop-up on the browser where you then type in your credentials. Okay. And type the password. It tells me that that's my account and I'm using pay-as-you-go, tenant ID, and using an Azure cloud environment. Good. So let's get started with creating our resource group first. The command will be new -az resource group, and I will use tab completion and use -name. The name of my resource group would be, let's say, prod_IT. And then the location in which I want to provision, it is in East US. And hit enter. Right. Now that the resource group is created, let's go ahead and lock it with PowerShell. But before that, I'll just go to the UI and see if the resource group is actually created. There you go. My prod_IT resource group is there. And then under locks, there are no locks. So once we have created the lock using PowerShell, we should be able to see one row here. We can do it through GUI as well, but let's learn how you can do it with PowerShell. We'll go back to the PowerShell window and run the command new -az resource group lock. That will be new -resource lock. Use tab completion, and the name of the lock would be, let's say, do not delete. Yeah. And then what kind of lock is it? Is it something you want to prohibit against read-write operations or delete? Well, these are the two options available for us. So the lock level is cannot delete. That is a lock level. Now you need to specify the lock on a particular resource, and in this case I want to specify it on a resource group, which is prod_IT. Hit enter. Are you sure you want to create the following lock on prod_IT? Just say yes, hit enter, and looks like the lock is created. I'll go back to the UI here and refresh this. There you go. The do not delete lock is created on the resource group called prod_IT. Now nobody should be able to delete it, right? So let's try to delete this resource group using PowerShell. Well, of course, like I said, we can go and delete from here, but we are learning PowerShell here. So I'll go back to the PowerShell and run the command to delete the resource group. The command to delete the resource group is remove -az resource group, and then the resource group name, which is prod_IT. Hit enter and see what we get. There you go. We got a message which clearly says that I cannot perform this delete operation because the scopes are logged, right? Please remove the lock and try again. Okay, so now we need to delete the lock. So let's try to remove the lock using PowerShell using the command remove -az resource lock, and then I would use the lock ID syntax to remove it. But before we delete it, we must know what the lock ID is. So I'll use get -az resource lock to get the list of locks I have, and the one that I'm interested is in do not delete, and here is the lock ID. All right, so just copy that and then say remove -az resource lock with the lock ID of this part, right, which we just copied. So I'll paste it, make sure that it is right, /locks. Okay, did not copy it properly. It should have copied till this section as well. So when we copied, we just copied the first line but did not follow the subsequent suffix. So I'll just run it and see what happens. It says delete is not supported. All right, no problem. So we'll go back and add this part, the ending part here. All right, now see what happens there. There you go, we got a true message. That means that the resource group is deleted. Now if I do get -az resource lock, you will see that there are no resource locks in our subscription. And this should be the same if you go to your Azure portal and verify this fact. There will not be any locks to the resource group. So here I am in the resource group called prod_IT under the lock section. I'll just refresh this so that this goes away. Let's see. There you go. So the lock has been indeed deleted. So in this demonstration, we created a resource group, logged it with PowerShell, and then tried to delete it with remove -az resource lock command. Everything that you do in GUI can be done in PowerShell. So it's always recommended that if there is any repetitive activities that you want to do, you will have to design a script, keep it in your repository, and then run it as and when you need it. But any one-time activities, one-off activities, it's always recommended to do it using Portal because it's faster that way. Using resource manager templates will make your deployments faster and more repeatable. For example, you no longer have to create a virtual machine in the portal, wait for it to finish, and then create the next VM and so on. Resource Manager template takes care of the entire deployment for you. ARM templates have a lot of benefits. They improve consistency in deploying resources. So if you ever have to deploy the same set of resources again and again for similar environments like dev, test, or prod, you just have to pull the trigger, execute the code, and it does the deployment for the entire infrastructure stack for you. That means that all your complex deployments are worked out simply by ARM template code in JSON. Administrators are usually bombarded with deployments and multiple infrastructure related activities. And it is quite possible to forget to change certain parameters on that virtual machine or edit the properties of that storage account. ARM templates reduces the manual efforts and hence reducing any scope of mistakes or human errors. A resource manager template defines all the resources that must be created using that template. An Azure Resource Manager template is written in JSON, and this will allow you to express how you want the resources to be created. In simple words, JSON is a collection of key value pairs. Let's talk about this with an example. A key value pair may look like this. A virtual machine name is a web server. A virtual network name is prod vnet. A network ID is 10.20.30.0.24. So that's how key value pairs look like. Now, once you have defined all the key value pairs in a JSON format, then you can call that JSON with one of the supported platforms like PowerShell. So let's say you have a JSON file with the name network.json or infrastructure.json. So you'll keep that somewhere in D drive or F drive, wherever. Once that is ready, you will call that with PowerShell and the resource manager template will automatically start building everything that's there in the JSON file. When it comes to JSON, we need to understand what parameters are and what variables are. In the next two sections, we will be talking about parameters and variables. Let's talk about parameters and variables. Starting with parameters. In parameters, you specify which values you can input when deploying the resources. That means you have the option to specify which values are configurable when the template runs. So when the script runs, the script will let you input certain values like usernames, passwords, domain names, or any other properties that would be unique for every resource or every virtual machine. So any value that we do not have to reuse during the template is a parameter. So this will give the user an option, an opportunity to input that particular value into the script. If you take a look at this particular parameter called admin username and admin password, now these values will not be same for all the virtual machines in the organization, and hence the administrator must input those values during the script creation. So script pauses for that time, waits for the admin's input to type the attributes like admin username and admin password in this case, and then the script moves forward. Variables, on the other hand, are values that will be passed on to all resources, and this would be reused during the script execution. So these values would be used throughout the template. For example, you might define a storage account name one time as a variable and then use that variable throughout the template. If the storage account name changes, you need to only update the variable once. Now here's an example that illustrates a few variables that describe networking features for a virtual machine. Variables like network name, address prefix, subnet name, subnet prefix, public IP name, these do not change for the infrastructure again and again. These only have to be hard-coded once and they continue to run as long as the script is executed. So these values will be passed on to the resource and can be reused as well during the VM creation. That is a lot of theory about Azure Resource Manager templates. We need to understand ARM templates practically rather than talking about variables and templates and parameters and schema, etc. So let's start using some of the templates and understand ARM templates JSON template in a better way. Now what Microsoft has created here is a web page which has most of the templates that an administrator or a developer would need. So you can land up on this page by quickly doing an internet search for this keyword, which is Azure Quick Start Templates. Or if you can somehow write this down, it will take you to the web page directly. So Azure Quick Start Templates is a way in which you can go ahead and create your own infrastructure. Now here, as you see, as on today, there are 799 Quick Start templates. I remember a few months ago, probably 8 or 9 months ago, it was close to 500. That means that Microsoft is constantly adding new resource templates into their repository. Now it's just not Microsoft, it's people like you and me and other companies that are adding templates to this repository. Always make sure that the template that you use for your production or test environments is properly seen and tested, so there is no malicious code inside it. For example, if you look at this particular template which says that it will create an Azure virtual machine with a new AD forest, yeah, so it will make sure that the VM that it deploys is also a domain controller. What this template does will be then written inside the description part of this template. You can search for a specific template. So if you're looking for, let's say, a load balancer or a template that will create a load balancer for you, yeah, just go ahead and search for it, and it just shows up all the templates that have this term load balancer inside it, right? So you can also search for specific, let's say, web app. I want to just create a web app. There you go. So dynamic web test creation, call custom APIs from Azure Logic. So there are 90 templates that match my string here. On the left hand side, you can also filter them by a specific resource type, right? In the subsequent video, we will go ahead and use or pick and choose a template from this repository, drill down to the JSON part of it, look at how the variables are configured, how the parameters are written, and understand JSON. We will also go ahead and deploy it and see if it actually deploys something in the Microsoft Azure portal. Templates provide everything you need to deploy your solution. There could be others that might just serve as a starting point for your template. Either ways, you can study these templates to learn how to best author and structure your own templates. You could start by browsing to Azure Quick Start Templates Gallery to see what's available. In the gallery, you will find a number of popular and recent updated templates. These templates work with both Azure resources and other popular software packages. Let's go and look at the JSON file and specifically the Azure resource template description to understand what they actually mean. In this example, we'll look at how you can create a simple virtual machine. Now, talking about it, we have it right here. Deploy a simple Windows virtual machine. I'll click on it this time and look at the description of this particular template. Now it says that this template allows you to deploy a simple Windows virtual machine using few different options of Windows versions. This will deploy an A2 size VM. A template will have parameters and certain variables. As we spoke earlier in the parameters video, that parameters are certain values that can be input during the script execution. So when you call the script using PowerShell or using CLI, it will prompt you to type the admin username, admin password, DNS label prefix, etc. So these are parameters which will be changing every time during a VM creation, because you probably do not want the username to be same for every VM or DNS label prefix to be same for every virtual machine. Hence the author has marked these particular attributes as parameters. However, you can always hard code these parameters into the script. It is not recommended to have passwords or usernames or credentials of such matter should not be hard coded into the JSON template. If you want to look at the JSON, which is located in the following path, you can either copy this or go to the link directly, or either click on this button called as Browse on GitHub. Now if I right click and open a new tab, it will take me to a new web page which is github.com, and this is where my template is stored. Remember that you can call the JSON template directly from this URL using this particular command, which is new-az resource group deployment in a resource group called whatever, and the template URI is as follows. Or you can copy this template from this repository in your own computer and then launch it from there. In that case, you will say -template URI C drive ARM / whatever your file name is, right? The path will just change. So this particular commandlet, which is new-az resource group deployment, will let you call a template from a URL like this or from a local file located in your machine. Going back to Azure Quick Start template for deploying a simple Windows virtual machine, you probably might want to look at what the documentation of this template says. What has the author written about it? In the case, you may directly go to readme.md, which has almost the same information, or go to azure deploy.json, which will give me concrete information about what JSON is and what are the parameters and variable passed when this JSON is called. Well, this is in HTML format, and then you can click on this raw button, which will show me in simple notepad format. I usually have a habit to open this JSON in Notepad++ because that gives a better formatting. So just in case during editing, if there are any errors, then it just shows on that line number. I will launch Notepad++ on my computer and copy this JSON into it. Okay, so here's my JSON, which will create a virtual machine for me. And right on the top where you have the schema declared, which is https://schema pointing to azure.com, and that's where all the schemas for Azure are located. Starting from parameters, looks like the parameter being used is admin username, admin password, DNS label prefix, Windows OS version. Well, these are the parameters that are passed. Now, the difference between some of them, like admin username and Windows OS version, is that admin username does not have a value. For example, there is no default value being passed. That means you will get a pop-up. In this case, Windows OS version, the default value is hard-coded in the JSON template. So this will not appear as a pop-up. That means when I call this particular template, I will get a pop-up to type the admin username and the password and the DNS label prefix, because the default value for these attributes is not specified inside this template. Well, you can definitely go ahead and hard code it by typing the values here like this and say that default value is root administrator, something like that. Yeah. Now, after you punch in the default value for a parameter, you will not get a pop-up to type or a prompt to type the admin username, right? As long as the grammar of JSON is correct. When I say grammar, I just mean these quotes, double quotes, colons, and commas must be in right places. JSON is not grammar friendly. That means you need to have these punctuations and symbols in right places. Otherwise, it just gives you an error and fails during the script execution. So we got the parameter section where you have admin username, password, DNS label prefix, and OS version and the metadata described. There are other sections where you have variables. In one of the other videos, I was talking about parameters and variables. Now, variables will be repeatedly used in the JSON. Variables defined in this JSON are storage account name, nickname, address prefix, subnet name, etc., etc., etc. Now, this can be used again and again in the script. As you see right here under resources, I'm calling this particular variable called storage account name, so I do not have to type it one more time. So the resource name here is called from a variable called as storage account name. So like I said earlier, these attributes will be picked up again and again in this script. So variables are reused in the template, whereas parameters are there to pass values during the script execution. In the next video, let's go ahead and understand how you can call this template using PowerShell. Alright, let's go ahead and create a virtual machine, but this time we're gonna do with an ARM template and not with the PowerShell. Of course, we'll be using PowerShell to call the ARM template, which is right here in this particular URL, which is deploy a simple Windows VM. You can either click on deploy to Azure, which will take me to a form where I just have to click on submit button and it will do the deployment for you. There's no fun. So we will go to the GitHub and look at this JSON here, which we did in the previous video, that it will create a virtual machine of the following configuration. So the virtual machine OS will be 2016 data center. The allowed values here, so if you do not like 2016 data center and your purpose is to create, let's say, 2019 data center, you can take this out and just paste it here. Of course, it needs to be done in your Notepad++. Then there are other variables like these: the storage account name, network card, address prefix of the network card, subnet in which the virtual machine will be hosted, the public IP address, the virtual machine name. As you see, there are certain things that can be modified, but of course it needs to be done in Notepad++ and not in this web page. And let's go ahead and do it now. So what I will do is click on raw and copy this whole content. Then I will open Notepad++ and open a new tab, paste it here. Now I can go ahead and modify a few values here. Like I said, let's say you do not want 2016 data center, you like a 2019 data center maybe. So I'll just copy this part carefully and paste it in between these double quotes, right? That's it. Now look at other values. Maybe you're looking for class C IP address, so I'll change this to 192 address prefix here, and then put the same thing for subnet prefix as well. The name of the virtual machine is simple VM, which I'll change it to Windows Web Server, something like that. Yeah. So basic modifications are of course possible. Here the storage type is standard underscore LRS, which is local redundancy services. So we haven't discussed about storage accounts yet. What storage accounts are, different kinds of replication options available. We'll talk about them later. But yeah, you can definitely modify the type of storage, how it replicates. Um, Public IP address, do you want that to be static or dynamic? Well, there are a lot of variables that can be modified as you scroll down in the page, right? If you look at the VM size, it is standard underscore A2. You can find out what are the VM sizes available on the Azure web page in the virtual machine section, then put that particular VM size here. There are a lot of values that can be modified, but we'll keep it simple for now, and let's see if this can be deployed. I will save it somewhere in my temp directory and then call this file using PowerShell. Let's save it. So this goes onto my desktop, and I'll create a folder called ARM templates and click on open and click on open. Now that file is saved. Now if I go to my directory there on the desktop, I will see that the file new3.txt is there. So I'll rename this as deploying new vm.json. Yeah, that makes it more appropriate. Now I will launch PowerShell and call this using the new-az resource group deployment commandlet. Before I do that, I have to say login. I have to log into the Azure account, so that will be login-az account. Okay, so authentication should be done. So I'll go back to the portal and see what will be the syntax of executing or calling this JSON. It will be something like this: new hyphen Azure resource group deployment hyphen resource group name, and the template URI in this case will not be the URL. It will be my file which is in my local computer. So I'll copy all of this from here and go back to PowerShell and just paste it. So that will be new hyphen Azure, that will be new hyphen AZ resource group deployment in a resource group called, I have a resource group called dev underscore IT or prod underscore IT or something like that, but you can of course get the AZ resource groups using PowerShell. Let's see how many resource group I got. I've got 3 resource groups. Yeah, so let's deploy it in prod IT. So resource group deployment, and the name of the deployment, just give it some name, doesn't matter. It's a new VM deployment, and that will go in a resource group called prod underscore IT. All right, and the template URI is located on my computer, the local computer, so which is this particular path, right? See users, wherever you have kept it, and then just do a tab completion. Well, there's a space out here, so that's why it needs to go in double quotes, right? So I'll put this guy in double quotes. Yeah, and that's it. Let's hit enter and see what happens. There you go. Remember the variables and parameters section that I was talking about. Variables and parameters. Now, variables are something that will be reused again and again, whereas parameters are something that will appear as a pop-up. Now, these are parameters, right? So let's say I'll type root admin. That will be the username for this computer, or the administrator for this computer. Let's type the password. Good. DNS label suffix. What is a domain in which it will be joining? I'll just give it name like alpha beta gamma dot local or something, and hit enter. And now it's scanning through the entire script. There we go. We got some errors. Errors are good. Gotta troubleshoot these errors. Number one is that is not valid according to the validation procedure. The second error is that the domain name label alpha beta g is invalid. It must conform to the following expressions. Okay. And then the deployment failed. Okay, so this one is pretty easy to fix because it does not need a local, that is a prefix, that is a suffix. It is only asking for a prefix value, and we have added a suffix value there as well. So let's give it a shot again. Admin, password, DNS label, domain, yeah, alpha beta g, and hit enter. Now let's wait for a minute. Okay, so far so good, no errors. So the only error here was that alpha beta tag.local is a fully qualified domain name, whereas it is asking for just the prefix. As we discussed earlier, PowerShell is not only easy to learn, but also when you get error messages like this, it gives you the solution right there on the screen and tells you where to fix. And these messages are pretty much logical in nature. Like we saw here, the logic is it's a fully qualified domain name, whereas this guy is asking only for a prefix, and I typed suffix as well. All right, now it looks like it is doing something. So what we can do in the meantime is go back to the Azure portal using GUI, the graphical user interface, and then go to that resource group to see what's happening there. Is there a deployment happening or something going on? So I will launch portal.azure.com quickly. Then go to my resource group, and under deployments, I'll see what's happening. See, new VM deployment. This was the name of the Azure resource group deployment. That's the name we gave, right? That's the name we gave. So this is getting deployed, which is good. Now if I click on it further, it will tell me what exactly has been created so far and what is pending. So a public IP is created, a virtual network is created, virtual network card is created. On the overview, you will see what has been created so far. We do not see a virtual machine yet, so the work is still in progress. Give it some time and it should create all the resources that are required for the virtual machine to be ready. It first creates the dependencies, because a virtual machine cannot exist without a hard disk, without a network or a network card. So it creates those dependencies first. Then once a virtual machine is created, it then connects these individual components to it. So storage account, virtual network, public IP, and network interface are basic elements of a virtual machine. Virtual machine should be the last one to get created, and that's exactly what it's doing, right? So let's give it some time. A virtual machine usually takes about 4 to 7 minutes to be fully provisioned. And once it is ready, we should be able to see that under the virtual machine section. Right now it is empty, but should be published anytime there. I'll pause the video for a minute and resume once the virtual machine is ready. Resuming the video from where we left, here if you see there's an error that occurred during the VM deployment. Now if I click on error details, it says that the Windows computer name that we used is more than 15 characters. I can see the similar error message on the PowerShell screen as well. So if I go back and then look at the error message in detail, it says Windows computer name cannot be more than 15 characters long. So revisiting the JSON here and looking at my computer name, I see that the computer name that was used is probably more than 15 characters. I did not count it, but it may be the case. So I can't find it at this time, so just do a Control F and search for name. There you go. Now this is simple Windows VM, and I think this is an incorrect JSON file I'm looking at. I'll open my file, which is right here. Okay, now if I search for the name, there you go. The name is probably more than 15 characters, looks like. So I'll remove the Windows thing and just keep web server as a name. Save it and go to PowerShell and execute this one more time. Alright, admin username, root admin, password, and DNS prefix. So we are just fixing the errors one after another, and also looking at the power of PowerShell to see how we can deploy it and how the error messages are easily understood, comprehended. So that way PowerShell does not show complex errors on the screen. It just makes things easier by pointing out to the real problem instead of people or the administrators looking around logs, events, and troubleshooting it. Let's wait another minute for this to deploy, and if there are any errors, we'll troubleshoot them together. I'll pause the video for now and resume once it is ready. So looks like the script got executed here and the output is there, and I do not have any red marks or any error messages on the screen. It shows me that the provisioning state is succeeded and it's incremental in nature. The following attributes have been set properly. Well, let's go to the graphical user interface on portal.azure.com and check this. Now, okay, this is succeeded. Under overview, I'll have the virtual machine as well this time. The web server is ready. So under virtual machine section, I should have the virtual machine which has the public IP address and a private IP address too. The private IP address must be in 192 class C series. Okay, so as you see here, that's the public IP and the private IP address just as we specified in the JSON template. So what we noticed is that we really do not have to go through the graphical user interface to create resources. You can create it with PowerShell, call a JSON using PowerShell, and do wonders with that. Now we just created a virtual machine, but we can create an entire infrastructure or a whole data center in Azure with ARM templates. That is the power of ARM templates. What you need to do is spend time on writing the JSON, authoring the JSON. Once it is ready with no errors and optimized properly, then you're just ready to deploy the data center n number of times repeatedly. So our virtual machine is ready and deployed in the Azure portal. Now I also want to show you, take a minute to understand how beautifully you can interact with this virtual machine using PowerShell. So at this moment, as you notice, this machine has an A2 size VM. So that is equivalent to 2 CPUs and 3.5 gigs of memory. Great. So what we can do is try to interact with this VM from PowerShell and change the size right from there. So I do not have to get into this size section and then modify the values from here, right? This can be done with PowerShell. And not just the size, I'm referring to one particular example here, but anything that you see in this console can be modified and you can interact with this virtual machine in every possible way. I will launch the PowerShell here and then connect to my Azure subscription quickly. Yeah, connect to my Azure account. All right. Oh. Okay. So what we're gonna do is retrieve this virtual machine using PowerShell, see the number of virtual machines we have, and then connect to this, play around the properties, and update the size of the virtual machine. Let's say in this case it says that my web server, which is located in a resource group called prod IT, has a VM size of standard underscore A2. Now I want to maybe decrease it or scale up to A3 or A4 maybe, and we will see how we can modify it using PowerShell. In PowerShell, if we ever have to declare variables, we have to declare with a dollar, and then dollar, you can put anything, dollar VM, dollar ABC, dollar your name, anything, and then you say get hyphen VM. That means whatever is the output of this command will then go as an input to this. That means the output of this is stored inside $VM, right? In this case I got an error message because my command is not right, so it will be get hyphen AZ-VM. So this particular output, this one that you see, is going and sitting inside $VM, right? So I can then say $VM dot a particular attribute like resource group name in this case. Yeah, so that's how it is. So I said $VM dot resource group name is that. So what will I get if I do $VM dot name? It will be web server. $VM dot location will be the location of the virtual machine. Now because I have saved the output of get-azure virtual machine inside this variable, I can reuse this variable and get the respective properties of those individual sections. Now I will use this variable further to change the properties of the virtual machine. I have to first declare that my hardware profile of the VM will be standard underscore A3. I'm saying that my new virtual machine, which is web server, will no longer have standard underscore A2, but will have standard underscore A3. I hit enter. So now this variable is also declared. Now I have to update this particular attribute, which is the VM size. To update the attribute, the command is update -azvm, and you need to tell which VM do you want to update with the attribute -vm, and then my VM is there inside that attribute called $VM. You see the enter. Well, the resource group name is prod underscore IT because it's looking for an input called resource group. Let's give it that. Just wait for a minute for the VM size to get updated. I'll go back to the UI and see what's going on here. This should change to A3. The click of a button, standard A3. So if you have this part scripted somewhere in your repository, you can quickly change the attributes from standard A3 back to A2. So when there is a lot of load on the virtual machine and you get a lot of statistics here that the CPU is reaching 90% or 80%, you can quickly run your script to change the VM size from 2 CPUs to 4 CPUs, and that also increases the memory. This demonstration was to tell you that you can interact with your resources in Azure with PowerShell, and also you learned about variables and how data can be stored inside the variable. Then that variable can be used again and again in the script. Right, so let's go ahead and clean up the lab. We may want to clean up the virtual machine, delete the virtual machine after your lab is done, or you might want to delete the entire resource group. It's all depending on what you want to do. But then it's important to clean up what you've done to minimize the costs. Then I'll just launch the PowerShell and then do the cleanup right from this single console. I'll use this command called remove-azvm, do a tab completion, and then use -resource group syntax. My resource group is prod underscore IT, the name as web server because that's the name of my machine. I said yes, confirm it. The VM should get shut down and then cleans up itself from the resource group. The next step, if you want to remove the resource group or the entire resource group, you will use the commandlet called remove-az resource group. Switching back to the console here and then looking at the virtual machine section, let's see if it is actually being deleted. There you go. This is cleaned up from the virtual machine console. It's gone, and I should have some confirmation on the PowerShell as well. So if you've not received it, that's fine. You should get that anytime. You can also use the similar command remove -AZ resource group name to clean up the resource group too. Also wanted to take a minute to show you how you can visualize the contents of the ARM template written in JSON. The reason to do so is because what's written inside this JSON is really difficult to comprehend with human eye. We really don't know what exactly is it deploying unless you go and introspect into individual components like storage accounts, network names. Well, is it creating a virtual machine or a web app is something only known if you go ahead and research into this JSON and look at this line by line. There is something called as visualize button, which you might have already noticed by now. So if I click on it, it will take me to another web page, which is armviz.io, which stands for Azure Resource Manager Visualization. Now this tells me what the Azure Resource Manager template will do. What is a JSON template do? Or what will the template create once it is called from PowerShell? So if I look at these individual components, it tells me that the ARM template will create a simple Windows virtual machine. I'll just zoom it a little bit so you can see it better. It says that it's going to create a Windows virtual machine, a network card, a virtual network, a public IP, and a storage account as well. You can click on these individual sections, individual blocks, and then know more about it. What is it creating in that virtual network? How many subnets? What is a CIDR block, or what is a network ID of that resource? So we will be pointed to that particular section here, right? So it then becomes easy for us to look at these individual components. And then if you want to know just about the virtual machine, you can click on it. It takes me to that section and helps me understand what is the size and specifications of that virtual machine. So armviz.io is a method to look at your JSON file and understand the individual components that we have inside the JSON template.